the president and co-founder of the Restaurant Opportunities Center United and the director of the Food Labor Research Center at UC Berkeley. Please welcome Saru Jayaraman. How you doing? Great to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Okay, you were so great the first time. We had to have you back.
Thank you.
More relevant than ever, some of the things you were talking about. You've always been a great tribune for the restaurant workers of America. Let's first, before we get into the connection to the harassment news that's around, let's talk about tips, because this is very relevant to a country that's always debating minimum wage. This is one of those areas where America, pretty unique, right? That we still do it by tips?
We're so unique because actually tipping originated in feudal Europe. It was like aristocrats giving something to serfs and vassals. When it first came to the States, rich Americans brought it, and actually it was around the time of slavery, around emancipation. And the restaurant industry at that time demanded the right to hire newly freed slaves, not pay them anything, and let them live on customer tips. And so the idea of a nothing wage, then $0, now $2, comes from slavery. It comes from the idea that mostly black workers could earn nothing and live on tips. And now here we are 150 years later with a minimum wage of $2.13 an hour, and millions of women across America living on tips.
Yes, and it's an industry where like 1 out of 12 people in the country...
1 out of 11 people right now. It's almost 13 million workers.
Astounding.
Yeah.
And tell us why it is connected to harassment, and if there was not a tipping system, that situation would get better.
You know, right now, 70% of the millions of people across America who live on tips, who worked on the tip minimum wage of $2 and $3 and $4 an hour, 70% of them are women. And they live, you know, working at IHOP and Applebee's and Olive Garden. And their median wage, including tips, is about $9 an hour. They suffer from 3 times the poverty rate of the rest of the U.S. workforce. But worst of all, they are having to put up with anything and everything from customers, no matter how they touch them or treat them or talk to them, because that's where their income is coming from. That's how they're getting paid. That's how they're feeding their families, not from a wage. The wage is so low, it's going to taxes. So they're having to deal...
The customers are harassing.
The customers are harassing them, but get this. The customers are harassing them because they live on tips. But because they're living on tips, the manager says, dress more sexy, show more cleavage, wear tighter clothing in order to make more money in tips. Would you believe when we were doing this research...
So then the idiots just think that's an invitation to harass.
Well, not just that, the coworkers, the management. Exactly.
You know,
Well, speaking of Hooters, when we put out this research, would you believe the industry named a new segment, a recognized segment? It's called the breastaurant. The breastaurant is a new segment in the restaurant industry, and it's not just Hooters and Tilted Kilt and Twin Peaks. It's Olive Garden and Applebee's and Denny's, where women are told, show your breasts. But the thing is...
Not fully.
No, but show more breast.
Oh, I see.
It's the restaurant.
Show cleavage.
Yeah, show cleavage. At Denny's. I can't tell you the number of workers we've had from Denny's who tell us, my boss tells me, go home and dress more sexy and show more cleavage and come back so you can make more money in tips.
What a fucked up country this is.
And nobody else does it, just us.
Just because I'm the toad in the punch.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I mean, one of the things that tips, I mean, I'm not addressing this situation, but more generally, it seems to me, the point of tips is it does incentivize good service, right? And it's a way in which a customer can reward good service.
Well,
right?
But we don't do that with lots of other places where there's service. We incentivize.
Do you tip your doctor or your lawyer or your teacher? I mean, these are hardworking professionals.
Your pilot?
Many of them are immigrants, by the way, really hardworking immigrants. But there are, you know, we don't tip anybody else. This is the only industry where the actual bosses say, we shouldn't have to pay our own workers. You, the customers, should pay our workers for us.
Plus, you know, I've read recently about a lot of these high-level chefs who went down in the Me Too thing. And it's interesting. It said, the theme that ran through it for me was that when they weren't harassing, they were screaming.
Yeah.
You know, and when people ask me about the Me Too thing, the first thing that always comes to my mind is, I hate bullies of any kind.
Yeah.
And this is a type of it. Yeah. And I'm wondering, what other industries do you think have not been talked about yet? Now we're talking about restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, farm workers face this on the job.
I've heard
Domestic
that.
workers face this on the job. Pretty much in every industry, women who don't have power. And you know the thing is...
You know what one I haven't heard, and I'm going to get in trouble for saying it? Cops. fucking cops, man. I mean, every woman I've ever known has a story about, you know.
Well, they lack power.
Because they have power.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate power.
Exactly. But when you change that dynamic, you know, there are 7 states, for example, in our industry, that got rid of the lower wage for tipped workers. And they have half the rate of harassment as the 43 states that have this lower wage. And it's because in California, which is one of the 7 states, a woman doesn't have to put up with anything and everything from her boss. She gets a full wage from her boss,
right.
you know, and so she doesn't have to put up with everything from the customer. And that's why, thanks to the Me Too moment, New York is about to follow. Governor Cuomo actually just announced, thanks to leadership by women in the legislature, like Andrew Stewart Cousins and Ellen Jaffe, that we're actually going to get rid of that lower wage for tipped workers in New York.
But you're going to keep the tips.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all I'm worried about. I think you should be able to reward your waiters.
Tips
done
are
a great
still
job.
there.
And it's a great incentive.
We actually tip better in California than most other states. And,
right.
But the thing is, women get a wage. Women get an actual wage.
You know,
yep.
It's a little like making someone jump for it. You know, it's a little, it's an anachronism at this point. Let this one go. Okay. I'll give you the wall, but there is.
Unless you're in New York, everybody wants a tip in New York. They don't care what they do. Yeah. And they expect you to tip in New York too.
That would be fine, as long as, again,
right. You're walking down the street. I'm sorry.
No, I have. One thing I have found, people love when you give them money for whatever reason. I don't know what it is. But,